Sayu is probably one of the most underrated characters in all of Genshin Impact. She is very strong, and the only reason you don't see a lot of her is because every single animo unit in this game has a very particular niche that they are good at. Kazuha will buff your team's damage, Sucrose will share elemental mastery, Venti will group up enemies very tightly, all while dealing a ton of damage, and all of these characters are able to debuff enemies. In Sayu's case, she's a little bit like Jean, except she has one thing going for her that Jean can't do, and that's bringing a completely new playstyle to the table. Welcome to my Sayu guide, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about how to build Sayu, when you should build Sayu, what in particular she's good at, and where she fits in various teams. If you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below, and consider also liking the video just so that YouTube knows it doesn't suck. With all that being said, my name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Sayu. So despite people not really using Sayu that much, she's actually insane. Like other animo units, Sayu's kit deals with movement in one way or another. But unlike other animo units, she's actually pretty underused. Her elemental skill basically just turns her into Sonic the Hedgehog, where she rolls around at the speed of sound because she's got places to go. She also follows a rainbow by infusing her roll with the first element it comes into contact with. Now, like all other animo characters, there's an infusion priority with Pyro on top of everyone else. Now, if you really get into Sayu min-maxing, you will have to know the priority of infusion for animo characters, but generally speaking, it's not that important for her. When Sayu comes into contact with an enemy, she'll deal animo damage with the chance to also swirl elements and reapply them depending on what elements enemies have and what Sayu is infused with. That means by literally just rolling around, you can deal pretty solid damage. Now, your roll can be a tap for energy, or you can hold down for 10 seconds of rolling. The downside to holding is that it'll extend your cooldown on your skill, but that said, different parts of her kit generate different amounts of energy, and it can be worth taking advantage of all of them. Depending on how you're playing her, whether you're just rolling around to proc a bunch of reactions, or if you're just using her to generate energy as an off-field heal bot, you may not use all of the methods to gain energy, but it's important to know that her kick alone produces 2 particles, and connecting your roll with an enemy can generate 1 particle. You can generate up to 4 energy particles total from just rolling in her time slot due to the internal cooldown on them. So in total, if you spend the full time rolling and you kick an enemy when you're done, you can get up to 6 particles if you do everything correctly. The optimal thing to do is to hold but release almost immediately, so that way you get 3 particles for making contact with an enemy and the kick, but sometimes you will only need to tap as well, so it just depends on the situation. I personally like to hold roll for just 1 brief moment to get 3 particles. Now next up is Sayu's burst, and it's super straightforward. She basically just puts down a little Daruma that will heal within the area it outlines on the ground. You'll see this giant circle around it, and when you place it, it deals a quick heal to your team, but after that, it will only heal the character currently active on the field. The heal scales on attack initially, but that can change with Constellations. In my opinion, her off-field heal is pretty decent as is, but at Constellation 0, it will stop healing your on-field character at around 70% HP unless there aren't enemies around. When there's nobody to heal past 70%, it will just deal animo damage instead. It costs quite a bit of energy at 80 to activate, and it lasts for 12 seconds with a 20-second cooldown. Now, one big thing with Sayu's burst is that her second passive is pretty deceptive. When I initially read through this, it sounded like it would heal your whole party in single player, but after testing, it basically only heals multiple characters in co-op. Your off-field characters in single player do not receive the 20% heal. It will increase the size of her burst AoE though, so that's kind of nice. Also, one of the more important things in Sayu's kit is her first Ascension passive, which gives Sayu the ability to heal enemies by swirling. This basically just means that Sayu can act as a healer by using her to deal damage on field with her skill, and the heal is based on her elemental mastery here as well. This is one of the main reasons I feel that Sayu is pretty underrated, because she has an elemental skill-based heal, which is fairly rare, and it can also deal solid damage if you're running elemental mastery on her. Based on her kit, she can either be played as an on-field animo speed demon or as an off-field healer, and those two are the 2 roles that I'm going to show you how to build today. Now, real quickly, for talent priority, I recommend leveling her burst first, since its healing potential scales with its level. Her skill is important too, but you don't really have to worry about her basic attacks. Sayu's Constellations are really important to know about because it can change her gameplay just a bit, so let's talk about those next. Sayu's Constellations make her a much better unit and change up how you want to play her a bit, so really quickly I just want to go over those. First off, her Constellation 1 removes the 70% HP heal cap of her burst, which basically means she can heal your active characters to full. It also makes Sayu's burst attack enemies while healing at the same time, rather than waiting for them to be full on HP to attack. It's pretty solid overall. Her Constellation 2 increases the damage of her kick at the end of her skill based on how long you've been rolling. Now, if you're building her fully elemental mastery, the damage of the kick does not matter that much. However, it can add a little bit of damage to your rotation, so it's not really bad. Constellation 3 increases her burst level by 3, and C4 gives Sayu 1.2 energy every time she triggers Swirl, up to once every 2 seconds. C4 will basically allow you to be more lenient on energy recharge for an on-field Sayu, but unfortunately the energy gain itself is limited by a timer, so it doesn't really change too much. It just makes you a little bit more comfy on energy margins. Her C5 levels her skill by 3, and Sayu's C6 is an absolute game changer for her. Initially, you'd want to invest in Sayu's attack to get the most healing from her if you were deciding to build her as a heal bot instead of an on-field damage dealer. But C6 unlocks her full potential. It increases her burst's attack scaling based on elemental mastery, and it also gives Sayu bonus healing from her burst based on EM as well. While Sayu is viable before C6, her C6 makes it much easier to get value out of her in damage and healing. Her C1 is also pretty important, but the game changer constellation that will affect your build is C6, and I just wanted to briefly talk about that because it will affect how you change her artifacts. So speaking of which, next I want to talk about how to build Sayu. Now for artifacts, it depends on your investment in your Sayu and what AR you're at. Typically, if you're below AR 45, I don't really recommend farming out domains because you don't get a guaranteed 5-star artifact until you get to AR 45 and run the highest level ones. So personally, I recommend just throwing on a 4-piece set of Instructor for her, or anything that can give you energy recharge with the 2-piece. The main benefit of Instructors is that you don't really have to have a character dealing damage to get value out of it. All you really have to do is trigger a reaction with someone like Sayu, and you'll be giving elemental mastery to your team. For the main stats, because you're not farming for them, it's pretty lenient, but if you want Sayu to be a heal bot, I think that's what she's best at before AR 45. I would just go for something like attack percent healing bonus, or energy recharge, attack percent, and attack percent. Just depending on what pieces you have, you can mix and match. Just know that Sayu does need some energy recharge, so it can be good to run an energy recharge Sans, and you won't be really truly investing in your Sayu's max potential up until AR 45. Now, once you actually get to AR 45, her artifacts are super straightforward. Since she's an Animo unit, you'll want to build her with 4-piece Viridescent Venerer. Though she can be used to drive certain reaction-based teams, you get a ton of value from lowering enemy resistances and also buffing swirls. Since she's got low personal damage scalings, you want to build her one of 2 ways. One is to go all out on Elemental Mastery with Elemental Mastery Sans, EM Goblet, and an EM Circlet, which will essentially let your Sayu dish out solid on-field damage in a reaction team. If you have Sayu at C6, this Elemental Mastery buff will also buff her burst healing, which makes her a strong all-around unit. That said, if you feel like her healing with an Elemental Mastery setup isn't enough for you, or if you're playing her at C0 as a heal bot, you can also opt for an attack percent Sans, Goblet, and a healing percent Circlet. Sayu's healing scales off of attack, so it will technically give you higher yield, and throwing a healing bonus Circlet on there helps quite a fair bit. It's also worth thinking about the healing you're going to get from her skill with her Ascension 1. Her skill is a party-wide heal based on her Elemental Mastery, and it can be pretty solid in a pinch. My personal favorite way to play Sayu is on field like a certain speedy hedgehog with triple Elemental Mastery, but you can opt for her as a heal bot with attack healing if that's more your thing. For substats, you want to make sure that you have energy recharge up to around 160%. I know it sounds like a lot. The big issue is that she has an 80 cost burst, which no matter what way you look at it is a big number. And the good news is that she doesn't really lose much value for building her energy recharge anyways, so I'd highly recommend around 160%. After that, you can focus on Elemental Mastery, attack percent, and if you're using Favonius Greatsword, I highly recommend getting some crit rate in there, ideally around 30%. Speaking of Favonius Greatsword, let's talk about Sayu's weapons. For Sayu, you have some really easy weapon options. The weapon I recommend over anything else is going to be Favonius Greatsword, which can generate white particles when you crit with Sayu on field. The benefit of Favonius is that it gives all of the energy recharge you need for Sayu by level 90, and also lets you battery other teammates, which ultimately makes Sayu a much better supporting unit. Since her primary source of damage is based on Swirl, the base attack doesn't really matter. Another amazing Sayu option is going to be the new Makaira Aquamarine Claymore, which has an Elemental Mastery main stat and buffs your party based on their EM. For Sayu, it's a really good main stat, and the fact that it'll give your whole party a portion of the buff it gives Sayu is insane. Even with the downtime between its buffs, it's extremely strong, and I highly recommend it. One thing to note is that if you do opt for this weapon, you'll likely have to have an energy recharge sands on your Sayu unless you got really lucky with artifact substats, because remember, you are shooting for about 150 to 160%. That said, you can also opt for something like Rain Slasher for some elemental mastery and damage bonus. Rain Slasher will give you more healing and damage, and its passive in something like Taser will slightly increase Sayu's personal damage. The downside of Rain Slasher is that it doesn't help with energy at all, so I'd recommend using an energy recharge sands with Rain Slasher if you don't have the 150 to 160 ER requirement, at least met with substats. Outside of those three, you can opt for Sacrificial Greatsword. However, it's worth noting that unlike its one-handed sword counterpart, its energy recharge stat is pretty dang low at level 90, only reaching up to 30%. Using Sayu to roll twice and generate more particles is cool and all, but it can take up extra field time when you may not need it, so I recommend Favonius over Sacrificial here, especially with Favonius allowing you to funnel some white particles into your team. Now for free-to-play options, I personally recommend Forest Regalia, the new Sumeru craftable. It has an energy recharge main stat and drops a leaf with elemental mastery bonus on the ground when you activate a Dendro-based reaction. We'll talk about this in just a moment, but Sayu can actually be played fairly well in Hyperbloom teams, so this weapon can actually be pretty decent for her outside of just having an energy recharge main stat. The other free-to-play crafted option is Katsuragi Kiri, which has a 45% energy recharge stat at level 90, but has an effect that could be detrimental to how you play Sayu. If you use your skill, you lose energy and slowly generate more energy over the next few seconds. Essentially, that just means that you can't really pre-funnel energy into Sayu, which requires her to be on field much longer. So if you're using Sayu for something like an off-field heal bot, this might actually not be super great for you. However, if you're playing her for on-field reactions anyways, that doesn't really matter much, since you can use her skill long enough to get some of that energy back. Overall, the weapon is decent, it's just that if you're really optimizing, it's not that great for heal bot, because you'll either have to stay on field to capture the particles you get from using her skill after her burst, or you'll have to use her skill before her burst and wait for you to have her burst back and cast it, which can take a second away from your other characters like Fischl or Barbara or Xingqiu. It's basically all about time optimization, but if you don't care about the nitpicky stuff, then this sword's pretty dang good. Lastly, you can opt for Blood Tainted Greatsword for a high elemental mastery stat. It's a 3-star weapon, very easy to get, but I overall would encourage you to look towards the energy recharge craftables first, since the passives on those weapons fit her a little bit better. Otherwise, just use the highest base attack weapon you have, but ideally you should be able to get one of those weapons that I mentioned. Now next up, briefly, I want to go over the teams that you can play with Sayu and just sort of discuss the ideas behind them. Based on my testing and what I wanted to talk about in this video, there are 3 main Sayu teams that are highly effective and pretty fun to play. The first team is actually a newer type of team, a Hyperbloom team featuring Sayu, an Electro, a Hydro, and Dendro MC. The idea with this team is that Sayu is going to constantly reapply elements by swirling on field to trigger high octane, high damage Hyperblooms. For example, Fischl is a great character who both applies and deals a ton of electro damage, so playing Fischl here can be very strong. Fischl's Oz also has a lot of range, which lets you move around a lot. Another electro character that doesn't take much maintenance and will be able to apply electro as you roll around is Kuki Shinobu. The main thing is that you'll just deal less damage with her than Fischl, but she's pretty dang comfy in Hyperbloom. Now for a Hydro, you'll want an off-field Hydro applier. You can use someone like Kokomi for a little bit of damage, or you can use someone like Barbara, who will completely surround your Sayu and apply Hydro on contact with enemies. That's right, if you didn't know, if you contact an enemy with Barbara, it will apply wet to them. You can also use Xingqiu's sword orbitals to apply hydro, but I found that he just fits better off in other teams. Like, I can't imagine using Xingqiu on a Sayu team for just his swords when you have other teams like National that could do way better off with him. But either way, he's an option. In the last slot, as I said, DENDRO MC will be there to lower enemy DENDRO resistance while also applying DENDRO for about 15 seconds if you have Constellation 2. Right now, DENDRO MC is the best for this position, but if we get a character that applies more DENDRO or a longer period of time for DENDRO, they will likely be better. Now, the second team that I want to show you is a Sayu Taser team, which is essentially just removing the DENDRO from the Hyper Bloom team. This team just lets you output more non-reaction damage using other characters like Lisa or Yaimiko in the place of DENDRO MC. I personally like using Lisa here because she can lower enemy defense, which will allow you to deal more damage across the board, but Yaimiko can also be good for some auto turret action, so it's ultimately up to who you prefer. Now, the third team that I want to show you is a Sayu Soup team, where you basically just throw in a ton of different elements. You need electro to turn the stove on, you need water to boil in the pot, and you need fire to get the pot hot. Classic soup is electro, hydro, and pyro with an animo unit. However, you can replace the hydro with a cryo here, and it ends up being pretty okay. One of my favorite things about Sayu is that she works with a ton of starter units like Kaya, Xiangling, and Barbara. Basically, anything that revolves around your character while moving or hits at range can be a solid choice for Sayu because she's going to be making contact with tons of enemies, and anything you have orbiting Sayu is going to deal damage. And if not dealing damage, it's going to at least allow Sayu to swirl to deal damage herself. I really enjoy using Fischl, Kaya, and Xiangling in this team just because I think it's kind of funny, but technically using a Hydra here could also work very well, so someone like Barbara can fit the bill pretty dang well. Meanwhile, in every single one of these teams, Viridus and Venner is going to be lowering enemy resistances, and Sayu will be able to also deal tons of swirl damage personally, so all of your units should be dealing a little bit more damage, and overall the swirls and other reactions you should be hitting will make these teams feel pretty dang strong. Outside of those teams, you can realistically just use her as a healer and a debuffer in most teams. She fits in place of Kazuha in some aggravate teams, and while the damage won't be as high, you'll have a consistent healer, and at the end of the day, being alive matters more, so. Overall, Sayu is super flexible and can be a great fill unit for Animo. If you don't have Sucrose or are just looking for a new playstyle, it might be worth leveling your Sayu. Thanks for watching, everyone. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, make sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Also, if you enjoy live content, come check out the stream at twitch.tv/Braxophone. I go live there a few days a week. We try out characters, we do fun challenges, and we just play lots of fun games. Until then, I hope this guide taught you guys something new, and I'll catch you next time.